The envelope wasn't addressed to either of us. It was simply written in my mother's careful handwriting, the same looping cursive she used on birthday cards and grocery lists, just one word: later. I found it 4 months after we buried her. It had slipped behind the bottom drawer of her dresser, hidden the way important things sometimes hide themselves, quietly, patiently, waiting for the right kind of silence. And by then, my sister and I weren't speaking anymore. Before that day, grief had made us gentle with each other. My mother's house still smelled like eucalyptus and starch, the scent of her ironed curtains drying in the morning sun. Even after she passed, neither of us could bring ourselves to wash the pillowcases she last used. The indentation of her head remained, as if memory had weight. My sister, Marianne, arrived at the hospital first the night Mom died. She always moved faster than me. Faster decisions, faster emotions, faster words. By the time I parked, she was already sitting beside Mom's bed holding her hand. "She waited," Marianne whispered when I came in. "I told her you were on the way." Mom looked so small beneath the blankets. Her breathing had that fragile, papery sound I still hear sometimes when the house gets too quiet. I held her other hand. She didn't open her eyes, but her fingers tightened around mine once, just once, before she was gone. That was the last peaceful moment my sister and I shared. We grew up in that house, a pale yellow place at the edge of town where the yard sloped into a patch of stubborn land my mother always called our inheritance. Not money, not jewelry, land. It wasn't large, and it certainly wasn't valuable to anyone except her. She grew vegetables there long after her knees started failing. Tomatoes crooked as smiles, peppers that burned your tongue for hours, mint that took over every corner. "People sell land when they forget who they are," she used to say, wiping dirt onto her apron. "This ground fed your grandparents during years money couldn't." Marianne never cared for that speech. She preferred numbers, not sentiment. Even as girls, she counted things: coins, grades, time spent on chores. I collected moments instead. The way Mom hummed when cooking, the creak of the back door, the rhythm of evening teacups tapping saucers. Different children, same mother. Different adults, too. I stayed nearby, married a mechanic who later passed from a sudden stroke, and worked part-time at the library. My life became quiet early, predictable. Marianne moved to the city, married into business, divorced quickly, then remarried someone wealthier. Her life was movement, always upward, always forward. Still, every Sunday she came home for lunch. Mom cooked, and for a few hours we pretended time never split us into separate worlds. After the funeral, Marianne handled everything. "I'll manage the paperwork," she said, while stacking sympathy cards into neat piles. "You shouldn't have to worry about legal things right now." I was grateful. Numbers exhausted me in those days. I could barely remember to eat. 2 weeks later, she called. The lawyer read the will. Mom divided everything equally, the house, the accounts, all 50-50. Her voice was calm, efficient, almost rehearsed. I remember standing in Mom's kitchen, staring at the sugar jar she'd never let go empty. "Oh," I said softly. "Okay. You don't want the land anyway," she added quickly. "Maintaining it would be difficult for you alone. We should probably sell the property and split the money." The word "sell" sat strangely in my chest, but grief dulls arguments. "Maybe," I said. She exhaled in relief. "Good, I'll talk to an agent." And just like that, decisions began happening around me instead of with me. Over the next few weeks, Marianne visited often, but not like before. She didn't sit at the table anymore. She measured walls, took photos, made calls outside. I tried helping once, wiping cabinets. "No need," she told me gently but firmly. "It's better not to disturb things before appraisal." The house stopped feeling like home. It became an object under evaluation. One afternoon, I found her kneeling in Mom's bedroom, sorting jewelry into 3 piles. "What are those?" I asked. "Items with market value," she replied without looking up. Sentimental things you can choose later. I nodded, though something about the phrase market value made my stomach tighten. Still, I trusted her. She was the older sister, the capable one, the one who understood contracts and signatures and consequences. Grief makes you lean on the personality that feels strongest. A month later, she handed me a printed document. "Here's the estate summary," she said. "Sign at the bottom so the lawyer can finalize transfer authority. It just confirms we both agree to proceed with sale preparations." I didn't read it carefully. I wish I had. But that day I kept remembering Mom asking if the tomatoes needed watering hours before she couldn't speak anymore. My mind lived in past conversations, not present paperwork. So I signed. Marianne hugged me after, a long embrace, almost emotional. "I'll handle everything," she whispered. At the time, it sounded comforting. Later, I would understand she meant it differently than I heard. Months passed. The house emptied piece by piece, furniture donated, dishes boxed, garden left untended for the first time in 40 years. The soil hardened like it knew abandonment was coming. I stopped visiting because each trip erased another memory. Then, one rainy afternoon in October, I returned alone to collect the last of my books. The house felt hollow, echoes where laughter once settled. While pulling open Mom's dresser to check the back panel for a missing photograph, the bottom drawer slipped off its rail. I kneeled to fix it and noticed paper wedged behind the frame. Yellowed, folded twice, careful handwriting across the front. Later. Not my name, not Marianne's, just later. I don't know why my hand started shaking before I even opened it. Maybe some truths announce themselves before they're read. I unfolded the letter slowly. The first line made my knees weaken. If you are reading this, then the first document has already been shown to both of you. My heart began to pound so loudly I couldn't hear the rain anymore. There had never been a first document, at least not one I had seen. And in that moment, standing alone in my mother's empty bedroom, I understood something had been decided about my life without me ever being part of the conversation. I kept reading. "Marianne will want to sell the land. She always has. But this part of our family must not leave your hands." My throat tightened because my sister told me Mom left everything equally. And suddenly, I knew there had always been another envelope. Just not for me. I had to sit on the floor before finishing the letter. The carpet still held the faint powdery scent of Mom's lavender sachets. For a moment, it felt like she was nearby, just in the kitchen boiling tea, and I only needed to call her name. But the silence stayed. My hands trembled as I unfolded the second page. "I love you both differently, and that difference matters here." Mom's writing tilted slightly, like she had paused between thoughts. "Marianne understands business. You understand roots. One builds forward, the other holds memory in place. This land needs the second kind of love." My throat tightened. "I have created a separate instruction for the lawyer. The house and accounts are to be divided equally, but the back property, the garden and surrounding ground, is to transfer only to you, Eleanor, not for its value, but for its keeping." I stopped breathing for a second. My name, written plainly, unmistakably, not shared, not negotiable, given. A slow cold spread through me. Because the lawyer had never mentioned this, Marianne had never mentioned this, and I had already signed something allowing sale preparations. I read the last paragraph. "If Marianne shows you only the main will, it means she is still afraid of losing control. Forgive her if you can, but do not surrender the land. It carries a promise older than either of you. The documents are filed and notarized. The envelope marked later is your protection." My mother knew. She had expected this possibility. My chest tightened so sharply I had to press my palm against it. I looked around the empty bedroom. The dresser drawers gaped open like missing teeth. Sunlight came through bare windows where her curtains used to sway. The house no longer felt hollow, it felt witness. Every visit Marianne made, every hurried signature, every time she urged speed, not grief, preparation. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in my purse, though my hands refused to stay steady. The rain outside softened into a steady drizzle. I could hear tires passing on the wet road, ordinary sounds continuing a day that had quietly shifted my understanding of the past 4 months. I didn't cry. Not yet. Shock lives in a calm place first. I drove straight to the lawyer's office, the same one Marianne said had read the will to her privately to save me stress. The receptionist smiled politely. "Appointment?" "No," I said. My voice sounded unfamiliar to me. I didn't call Marianne that day. Instead, I went home and made tea the way Mom used to. Leaves steeped too long, slightly bitter, the way she insisted it should taste. I needed something ordinary to hold on to while everything quietly rearranged itself inside me. I sat at the kitchen table with the envelope beside my cup and watched the steam fade. For the first time since her death, I wasn't remembering my mother, I was understanding her. She hadn't doubted Marianne's love, she had doubted her restraint, and she trusted me to recognize the difference. Over the next week, I said nothing. Marianne texted twice about closing timelines and once about clearing the shed before inspection. I responded politely, neutrally, the same way I had for months, because I needed to see how far she would go when she believed the truth stayed buried. The answer came quickly. 3 days later, she called, unusually cheerful. "Good news," she said. "We've got a firm buyer, young couple, cash-backed mortgage. They love the land." The land. She said it easily now. "When do they sign?" I asked. "Next Friday, lawyer's office. You'll need to be there just for formalities. It's basically done." Formalities. My role in my own inheritance reduced to attendance. I looked at the envelope on the table. "I'll be there," I said calmly. She sounded relieved. "Perfect. After that, we can finally close this chapter." I almost answered, "You already did," but instead, I said goodbye. Friday came with a bright, sharp morning, the kind of clear sky that makes shadows look permanent. I dressed simply. The navy sweater Mom once said made me look steady. I carried her envelope in my bag, alongside a copy of the documents Mr. Patel prepared. Not to accuse, to clarify. That distinction mattered to me. The real estate office smelled faintly of printer toner and citrus cleaner. Marianne was already there when I arrived, standing beside a couple in their early 30s. She waved warmly. "There she is, my sister, Eleanor." The couple smiled politely. "This place is beautiful," the woman said. "We're planning a garden wedding someday." My chest tightened, not with anger, but with something heavier. Expectation built on a promise never hers to give. Marianne handed me a stack of papers. "Just routine signatures," she said softly. "We're almost finished." Her tone carried that same gentle urgency she'd used months ago. I didn't sit. Instead, I looked at her. "Before we start," I said calmly, "I need the lawyer to confirm the property description out loud." She blinked, surprised but still composed. "It's standard, Ellie. You don't have to." "I'd like to hear it," I repeated calmly. The agent glanced between us, uncertain, then nodded to the attorney present, not Mr. Patel, but the buyer's closing lawyer. He read the legal parcel description, voice steady and neutral. When he reached the section including the garden land, I opened my purse and placed the envelope on the table. "Please pause," I said. Marianne's smile faded slightly. "What's this?" she asked quietly. I didn't answer her. I addressed the lawyer. "This document exists within the estate file under restricted directive." I slid him the notarized copy Mr. Patel had given me. He adjusted his glasses and read. The room shifted. Not loudly, but unmistakably. The couple exchanged glances. The agent stopped smiling. Marianne's posture stiffened beside me. "What document?" she asked, voice tighter now. The lawyer cleared his throat. "This appears to be a specific bequest assigning the agricultural parcel solely to Miss Eleanor." "That's not correct," Marianne interrupted quickly. "We agreed to sell." I finally turned to her. "No," I said gently. "You decided to." Silence settled across the table. She stared at me, disbelief rising before anger could rise. "You signed the authorization," she said. "I signed trust, not surrender." I slid Mom's original letter toward her. Her hands didn't move at first. Then slowly she picked it up. The seconds stretched long enough to hear the building's air vent hum. Her eyes moved across the page. The color left her face gradually, not dramatic, just drained. "You went to the lawyer," she said without looking up. "Yes." "You should have asked me first." "I did," I answered quietly, "months ago, when I asked what Mom left us." She folded the letter with controlled precision. "This changes things," the agent murmured carefully. "Yes," the closing lawyer agreed. "The sale cannot proceed under current ownership authority." The young couple looked stricken, victims of a conflict they never saw coming. I felt for them deeply, and that feeling anchored me. This wasn't about humiliating Marianne. It was about stopping a wrong before it spread further. Marianne finally looked at me. Her expression wasn't fury. It was something more complicated, a mixture of calculation and hurt pride. "You're really doing this?" she asked quietly. "I'm honoring Mom," I replied. Her jaw tightened. "She trusted me to handle everything." "She trusted you with half, not all." For a moment, the sister I grew up with flickered behind the businesswoman she'd become, the girl who hated losing board games and rewrote rules mid-play. Only now, the stakes weren't childhood fairness, they were identity. The meeting dissolved quickly after that. The young couple left politely but shaken. The agent apologized repeatedly. The lawyer gathered documents with professional neutrality. Marianne said nothing more in that room. But as we stepped outside into the sunlight, she stopped beside the parking lot curb. Her voice was low. "You embarrassed me." I met her eyes. "No," I said gently. "I stopped a lie before it embarrassed you further." The distance between us felt larger than the years we'd shared growing up, and I realized this confrontation wasn't the consequence. It was only the beginning of it. She didn't leave right away. Most people would have gotten in their car, driven off, and saved the argument for later, behind closed doors where dignity survives easier. Marianne never believed in later. She stood beside the curb, keys in hand, staring past me toward the empty road. "You think this was about stealing from you," she said finally. Her voice was controlled but tight, like a drawer forced shut over too many things. "I think you hid something Mom wrote and tried to sell what wasn't yours." She laughed once, not amused, not angry, just sharp. "You always reduce everything to feelings." "And you always reduce everything to transactions," I replied softly. Her eyes flashed. For the first time that day, emotion surfaced cleanly. "You have no idea what I was dealing with." I waited, because beneath anger, Marianne only spoke truth when silence gave her no escape. She rubbed her forehead, smearing frustration across her expression. "The house taxes were overdue. Repairs needed inspection compliance. The roof alone would cost thousands. You don't have that kind of money, Ellie." "I would have found a way." "With what?" she snapped. "Library hours? Selling your car?" The words stung because they were practical, but practicality and honesty aren't the same thing. "You could have told me," she said. She looked away. "That land isn't just dirt," I added quietly. Her shoulders rose and fell. "That land is exactly dirt, unproductive, sentimental dirt. Mom couldn't let go of the past, and neither can you." The wind moved across the parking lot, carrying the faint smell of asphalt heating under the sun. For a moment, we stood like strangers debating a property line instead of sisters standing in their mother's shadow. Then she said something softer. "I wasn't trying to hurt you." I believed her, but intention doesn't erase action. "Why didn't you tell me about the second directive?" I asked. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked toward the horizon the way she used to when inventing explanations for broken lamps and missing cookies. Finally, she said, "Because you would have refused the sale." "Yes," I said. "And then the burden would have been yours," she said quickly. "Every bill, every repair, every legal issue. You would drown trying to keep a memory alive." "I would try," I said. Her eyes met mine now, almost pleading. "I was protecting you from a responsibility you couldn't carry." I shook my head slowly. "No," I said gently, "you were protecting yourself from not being in control." The words landed heavier than shouting ever could. She swallowed slowly. "You think I wanted this?" she asked. "You think I enjoyed being the one who had to make decisions while you grieved and avoided reality?" I softened slightly. "I wasn't avoiding reality. I was mourning our mother, and I was managing what she left behind. Both things were true, but only one required hiding the truth." She exhaled slowly. "I had already arranged the deposit before you even found that letter," she admitted quietly. "Backing out now will cost money." There was the real center of her urgency. "Whose money?" I asked calmly. She hesitated, then quietly. Monday began with 3 phone calls before breakfast. The first was from Mr. Patel. "The buyers have contacted their attorney," he said gently. "They're confused but cooperative. Since authority was misrepresented, they won't pursue action against you. However, they may seek compensation from your sister." I closed my eyes briefly. I had hoped the damage would stay contained within our family. Real life rarely grants that kind of neat boundary. The second call was from Marianne. Her voice sounded different, not defensive, not sharp, just tired. "They want the deposit back plus inspection costs," she said. "It's more than I expected." "I'm sorry," I replied honestly. Silence stretched across the line. Then she said, "I didn't think it would go this far." Neither had I, but decisions made quietly tend to grow loudly later. The third call came from the real estate agent. Professional, polite, careful with wording. "We'll need a written statement clarifying ownership before updating listing records," she explained. "I'll provide it," I said. When I hung up, the kitchen felt heavy again, not with grief this time, but consequence settling into place. I made tea and sat where Mom used to peel apples. The garden outside the window had begun growing wild. Late autumn weeds pushed through neat rows she once maintained daily. For months, I avoided looking at it. Now it felt like responsibility staring back. Later that afternoon, Marianne came over. She didn't knock, just walked in the way family does when boundaries used to be trust. She placed a folder on the table. "Statements," she said simply. "Costs I have to cover." I skimmed them. Legal cancellation fees, inspection reports, agent time. It was substantial. "You shouldn't carry this alone," I said quietly. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "You're offering to pay?" "I'm offering to share consequences," I replied. "We both signed things we didn't fully read." She studied me carefully. "You didn't misrepresent ownership." "No," I said, "but I trusted without asking questions. That helped create the situation." She sat down slowly across from me. For the first time since childhood, we looked at paperwork together instead of one of us handling it for the other. "I thought I was fixing things," she said after a while. "Fixing what?" "The past," she answered. "Mom lived her whole life holding on to memories. I didn't want us trapped doing the same." I folded my hands. Keeping something isn't the same as being trapped by it. She traced a line on the document absent-mindedly. You know what the land was to her, she murmured. Yes. And you know what it was to me? She asked. I waited. A reminder, she said softly, that she never left that life behind, even after everything improved. Her voice carried a weight I hadn't heard before. I remembered fragments, arguments when we were teenagers, Mom refusing offers from developers, Marianne wanting college funds secured earlier. Different fears shaped us. To Mom, land meant survival. To Marianne, security meant mobility. Neither wrong, just incompatible when hidden instead of spoken. I wasn't trying to erase her. I was trying to make sure we never struggled the way she did. I understand, I said. She looked up, surprised. I still won't sell it, but I understand why you want it to. Her shoulders eased slightly. For the first time, this felt less like a battle and more like translation between two languages we grew up speaking separately. We worked through the numbers together. I insisted on covering part of the cancellation costs, not because I was obligated legally, but because relationships aren't governed solely by legal lines. She resisted at first. You don't have to, she said. I know. I want to. After a long pause, she nodded. Before leaving, she stepped into the backyard. The late afternoon sun lit the overgrown rows gold. She stood there quietly. She would hate seeing it like this, she said. Yes. You really plan to restore it? Yes. She looked at the cracked soil. It's going to be hard. I know. Another silence. Not uncomfortable, just shared. As she reached the gate, she paused. I kept the second envelope because I thought you'd thank me later, she admitted without turning around, for freeing you from obligation. I stepped beside her. Instead, you freed me into it, I said gently. She almost smiled. After she left, I walked into the garden alone. The ground felt uneven beneath my shoes. Dry stems snapped softly with each step. I knelt near the old tomato bed and pushed my fingers into the dirt, cool beneath the surface, still alive. Mom used to say soil remembers hands. Maybe families do too, just slower. That evening, I made a list, repairs, tools, seeds for spring, not because I believed I could recreate her garden perfectly, but because keeping something doesn't mean freezing it in time. It means continuing it honestly. The inheritance wasn't land, it was stewardship, and for the first time since her passing, grief and purpose sat beside each other without conflict. But news travels in small towns faster than healing. By the end of the week, people started asking questions about the failed sale, about the argument, about the will. And soon, the story wasn't just ours anymore. By Thursday morning, the bakery cashier tilted her head at me before even ringing up my bread. I heard the house deal fell through, she said gently, the way people speak when they pretend not to gossip. Small towns never ask directly. They circle truth politely until it lands anyway. I nodded. We're keeping part of the property. Her eyebrows lifted just slightly, curiosity satisfied, but not finished. Well, your mother always loved that garden, she said. Would have been a shame. The kindness helped. The attention didn't. At the library, Mrs. Hargrove returned a book and lingered. I remember your mom teaching my daughter to plant carrots. People were worried developers were coming. People, meaning the town, had already built its own version of the story. By afternoon, 3 different patrons mentioned it in 3 different ways. Such a big offer you turned down. Must have been difficult between you and your sister. Families get complicated after inheritances. No one accused, but everyone knew enough to imagine. I called Marianne that evening. You're hearing it too? She asked before I could explain. Yes. She exhaled slowly. I never intended it to become public. It became public when contracts were signed, I said softly. A long pause followed, not defensive this time, just acknowledgement. Saturday morning, Mr. Patel suggested a formal clarification meeting. Better to address misunderstandings once rather than let assumptions grow, he advised. So we arranged it. At the community center, neutral ground, large enough for interested parties, including the buyers who requested reassurance no future disputes would arise. I almost declined, but hiding truth gives rumors oxygen. Mom always faced neighbors directly, even when uncomfortable, so I agreed. The room smelled faintly of floor polish and old coffee. About 12 people gathered, the buyers, the agent, 2 nearby property owners concerned about zoning impact, and unfortunately, several curious locals. Marianne arrived beside me, not ahead of me this time. A small change, but I noticed. Mr. Patel explained calmly, 2 estate components, miscommunication, legal correction. No accusations, no raised voices, just facts. When he finished, the buyers nodded, visibly relieved. "So the land remains private garden property?" the husband asked. "Yes," I answered. "No commercial development." His wife smiled faintly. "I'm glad, actually. It felt special." Something warm moved through my chest, grief reshaping into continuity. Then came the harder part. One of the neighbors, Mr. Collins, cleared his throat. "People were concerned about conflict," he said carefully. "We've seen families fracture on less." He wasn't asking for details. He was asking if we were okay. I glanced at Marianne. For a moment, the room faded, and I saw us as children sitting on this same building's floor during school plays, whispering jokes behind our programs. Different lives since then, same starting point. "We misunderstood each other," I said simply, and corrected it. Marianne nodded once beside me. No elaboration, no blame, just truth without spectacle. After the meeting, most people left satisfied. The agent thanked us, the buyers wished us well. Only a few neighbors lingered long enough to exchange sympathetic looks before heading home. When the room finally emptied, Marianne sat on one of the folding chairs and rubbed her temples. "I thought control prevented chaos," she murmured. "Sometimes it creates it," I replied gently. Winter arrived slowly that year. The first frost came thin and hesitant, silvering the garden just enough to reveal what still lived beneath the surface. I began visiting every morning, not to fix everything at once, but simply to stand there. Grief had made the space sacred. Responsibility made it practical again. I started small, clearing brittle stems, repairing the leaning fence post, sweeping the shed floor where old seed packets had turned to dust. On the 3rd morning, I heard footsteps behind me. Marianne. She didn't announce herself, just picked up a rake resting against the wall and began gathering leaves into a pile. We worked without speaking for nearly 20 minutes. The rhythm of tools replaced conversation, scrape, lift, rustle. Finally, she said, "I forgot how quiet this place is." It was never quiet to Mom. She said plants talk if you don't rush them. Marianne gave a soft breath that might have been a laugh. She always had patience I couldn't afford. "You had a different kind. You planned forward. She preserved backward." "And you?" she asked. I considered it. "I stayed present," I answered. Over the next weeks, she came often, not daily, not predictably, but enough that I stopped being surprised. Sometimes she brought coffee, sometimes she brought practical things, a new hose nozzle, replacement hinges for the gate, a small heater for the shed. She never called it helping. I never called it repairing. We just did the work. One afternoon, while sorting through old jars in the pantry, she held up a faded notebook. Mom's handwriting covered every page, planting dates, rainfall notes, small remarks like "pepper sweeter after late storms." Marianne traced the ink lightly. "She kept records of everything," she said. "Not everything," I replied gently, "just what mattered to her." She closed the book and handed it to me. "You should keep this." I shook my head. "We both should," I said. "It's not instructions, it's history." She hesitated, then nodded. For the first time, inheritance looked less like division and more like distribution of meaning. Spring planting began in late February. I ordered seeds, tomatoes like she loved, mint she could never contain, and a few new plants she never tried. Marianne studied the catalog beside me at the kitchen table. "You're changing it," she observed. "I'm continuing it," I corrected softly, "not freezing it." She leaned back. "I always thought keeping things meant refusing to grow. Only if fear decides. Memory can grow too." She looked thoughtful, absorbing something she'd resisted for years. The first planting day came clear and warm. I expected to work alone. Instead, 3 neighbors arrived: Mrs. Hargrove with carrot seeds, Mr. Collins with compost, and the bakery cashier carrying herbs wrapped in newspaper. Marianne watched them gather with quiet surprise. "You were right," she murmured. "Mom planted more than vegetables," I said. We worked together until the sun leaned low. At one point, Marianne knelt beside me, pressing seedlings into soil. Her movements were clumsy at first, then steadier. "So this is what she meant," she said softly. I didn't ask which part. She didn't explain. Some understandings don't need translation. Later, that evening, after everyone left, we sat on the back steps with tired hands and dirty shoes. The garden looked uneven, unmatched rows, mismatched spacing, but alive again. "I spent years trying to secure the future," Marianne said quietly. "And?" "I didn't realize stability could come from roots, not movement." I leaned back against the railing. She knew we'd learned different lessons from the same place. Marianne nodded slowly. "She trusted you to keep it, and maybe trusted me to eventually understand why." The resentment I'd carried for months loosened gently, not erased, resolved. We never spoke about the letter again. We didn't need to. Its purpose had finished, not just protecting land, but guiding us back into honesty. Inheritance had almost become possession. Instead, it became responsibility shared in different ways. Her world still moved fast: meetings, travel, decisions measured in numbers. Mine stayed slower: seasons, growth, time measured in weather. But now neither dismissed the other. We had learned the difference between controlling and caring. The first tomato ripened in early summer. I picked it carefully and placed it in her hand. She turned it over, studying the uneven shape. "Ugly," she said. "Perfect," I corrected. She smiled, fully this time, and for the first moment since Mom's death, the garden didn't feel like memory. It felt like continuation. The spring air was sharp with the scent of damp soil and the faint sweetness of early blossoms. I stepped on the back steps, the gloves my sister had returned to me still snug on my hands, and felt the garden in a way I hadn't before, not as a memory, but as work, responsibility, life under my fingertips. The sun was just peeking through the clouds, and for the first time I could hear the quiet heartbeat of the land, the soft buzz of insects, the scrape of tiny branches, the wind through the old maple. Marianne arrived mid-morning carrying a small crate of tools. She didn't speak first, just set them down beside the shed, brushing dirt from her sleeves. I had expected some awkwardness. After all, trust had been fractured, but instead she simply nodded at me. "Ready?" she asked, tone casual but precise, like she was easing herself back into the rhythm she had once claimed to dominate. "Always," I said, leaning on my rake. We started with the small greenhouse. It had been neglected for months, windows smeared with frost and dirt, seedlings choking on what remained of last winter's neglect. I bent low, pulling weeds carefully, smelling the sharp tang of damp earth in my nose. Marianne worked beside me, wiping grime from the glass, her movements precise but not unkind. Every so often our hands brushed over a shared seedling, and we'd exchange a glance, a flicker of recognition, acknowledgement, a wordless truce forming in the soil itself. By late morning, we had cleared the greenhouse and potted a dozen tomato plants for early planting. Sweat ran down my back, and my palms were rough, but I felt lighter than I had in months. The labor grounded me in a way that grief never could. This wasn't just property anymore. It was responsibility, stewardship, continuation. And somehow, working side by side with Marianne, it felt less like punishment and more like reclaiming something Mom had entrusted to us both, even if only I held legal authority. We broke for lunch, sitting on the back steps with a thermos of tea and a loaf of crusty bread. The wind played with stray hairs across Marianne's face, and for a moment I caught a flicker of the sister I had grown up with, the one who had shared secrets, laughter, and scraped knees. "You know," she said quietly, "I never realized how much work this really is. I thought it was symbolic. You take it over and the memory stays." I shook my head, biting into the bread. Memory isn't enough. You can't just inherit feelings. You have to live them, nurture them, give them soil, sun, water. She nodded slowly, staring at the garden stretching before us. "I didn't mean to overstep," she admitted. I wanted to make sure the legacy didn't crumble before it reached your hands." "And you thought hiding it from me was the way?" I asked gently. She didn't answer immediately, just chewed thoughtfully. Finally, she exhaled and said, "I thought it was easier for everyone that way." I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell her the easier way wasn't the honest way. But the wind shifted, carrying the scent of newly turned soil, and something inside me softened. Maybe this was the way to teach her too, through patience, through the rhythm of work, through the trust that comes from showing up every day. We spent the afternoon planting rows of lettuce, radishes, and herbs. Our movements became a quiet conversation, fingers brushing dirt, swapping small advice, occasional smiles shared over crooked seedlings. By the time the sun hung low, the garden looked alive again, not perfect, but thriving, carrying both memory and effort in every corner. As we cleaned our tools, Marianne paused near the shed. "I think Mom would approve," she said softly, "even if she had her doubts about me. I think she always knew who you were, and I knew I would need you to become who you are now." Her smile was faint, tentative, but genuine. And in that moment, standing in a garden that had once been a symbol of loss and secrecy, I realized something important. Inheritance isn't just about who owns what. It's about who shows up, who works, who chooses care over control. And maybe, just maybe, that's the legacy Mom truly wanted us to share. By the following week, word had quietly begun to spread through town. Small towns are like that. News drifts from porch to porch, coffee shop to bakery, and by the time you notice, everyone has formed their own version of events. I started hearing bits and pieces as I went about daily errands. "You kept the land?" the bakery cashier asked, her hands busy wrapping bread. "I thought Marianne sold it." "Yes," I said softly, giving a small smile. "We corrected a misunderstanding." She nodded, but her eyes lingered with curiosity, sympathy, and that faint judgment that seemed to float in the air wherever property and family drama collided. At the library, Mrs. Hargrove leaned over the checkout desk. "Eleanor, everyone's talking about the garden. The neighbors are amazed you managed to resolve it with Marianne," she said, voice low. "It could have ended badly." I shrugged, unsure if it was pride or relief I felt. "It didn't end badly," I said. "It ended truthfully. That's all I hoped for." Truthfully, that word had become my anchor these past months. Everything else, the gossip, the small judgmental looks, the whispered opinions, felt secondary to honesty. Yet not everyone reacted with understanding. A few neighbors lingered too long at the edge of the garden during morning walks, eyeing the newly planted rows of lettuce and herbs. Some asked questions politely, but their eyes carried subtle accusation. Was this the same Eleanor who let Marianne manipulate things? Was Marianne really the villain, or were both sisters at fault? Marianne, for her part, seemed to notice it too. One morning she brushed dirt from her hands and said quietly, "People will always have opinions. Doesn't matter if they're right or wrong." "I know, but it does matter how we respond." She gave a small, wry smile. "You always did have that stubborn streak." "And you always had the charm to hide your stubbornness," I teased. She laughed, faintly, but it was genuine. For the first time in months, it felt effortless. By midweek, the local real estate agent called to confirm the corrected legal filings. The buyers, surprisingly gracious, accepted the refund of their deposit and inspection costs. "We understand now," the husband said. "You're keeping something precious. That's rare these days." Hearing it aloud made my chest tighten. Precious. That was exactly how Mom had treated the land, not just as property, not as money, but as a living memory to nurture. Marianne and I began taking turns tending the garden, sometimes together, sometimes separately. She arrived with fresh seeds, gloves, and a sense of quiet acknowledgement. I found her pacing the rows of herbs, inspecting seedlings, occasionally muttering, "She would have planted this one differently." "Yes, and that's the point. We're planting our own understanding now." She nodded. I guess I had to see it this way to understand what Mom really meant. And perhaps, I thought, to understand herself. Neighbors began showing up more intentionally, not gossiping, but helping. Mrs. Hargrove brought compost, Mr. Collins shared tips for soil enrichment, even the bakery cashier appeared with young herbs wrapped in newspaper. It was strange at first, allowing others into this private inheritance, but slowly it became comforting. The garden wasn't just ours anymore, it had become part of the community's heartbeat too. Marianne watched one afternoon as I planted tomato seedlings. "I think she would be proud," she said quietly. "I think she would have wanted you here too," I replied. She looked at me, her expression softened by the realization that our conflicts had led to this point of shared understanding. I was angry for so long. I didn't see that it wasn't just about control. "No," I agreed, "it was about trust and responsibility." For the first time, I sensed not only reconciliation, but the beginning of real respect, rooted in honesty and labor rather than obligation or fear. As the weeks passed, the garden flourished. Each morning, the smell of damp earth and fresh leaves greeted me like a ritual. Each evening, Marianne would sometimes linger, helping water or checking the soil. And each time, a quiet understanding passed between us, unspoken, steady, durable. The gossip in town faded as people realized the drama had been resolved with dignity. Even Marianne, who had feared judgment, began to appreciate the subtle approval in others' smiles when they visited. It wasn't validation I sought, just evidence that integrity carries its own quiet reward. By early summer, the garden had become a sanctuary, a living testament to patience, forgiveness, and understanding. We worked hard, sometimes silently, sometimes exchanging laughter over crooked rows or unexpected weeds. And every so often, I'd glance at Marianne and realize we had both grown, not just as caretakers of land, but as sisters capable of honesty, empathy, and shared purpose. Summer settled fully into the garden. The sun lingered late in the evening, casting long, golden shadows over the rows of tomato plants, herbs, and flowers. The overgrown plot now breathed life, colors shifting with the warmth and care we both poured into it. Each morning I stepped into the garden, I felt a quiet pride, not for myself alone, but for the way we were learning to care together. Marianne came that morning with a basket of seedlings, peppers, marigolds, and a small fig tree she claimed she had rescued from her own backyard. "I thought this might work better here," she said softly, setting the basket down beside me. I smiled and nodded. "It'll be a good addition." For a moment, neither of us spoke, just kneeling in the dirt, arranging and planting. Our hands brushed occasionally, and the tension that lived between us for months felt distant, replaced by the rhythm of work and the soft hum of summer insects. After we planted, we sat on the back steps with our gloves off, dirt under our nails, the scent of earth and blooming flowers heavy in the air. Marianne broke the silence first. "I never thought I'd say this," she admitted, "but I'm glad you didn't let me sell the land." "You're glad?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "I'm relieved," she said finally. "I see now what it meant to Mom, and to you, and strangely, I see what it can mean to me, too." I didn't reply immediately. I let her words settle, feeling the quiet shift in the air between us. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, not yet, but it was recognition, the first fragile step towards understanding that neither of us had been entirely right or entirely wrong, just human. The next week, Marianne invited me into her kitchen for coffee. She had set a small vase of wildflowers, from the garden, on the table. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "not just for the garden, for not holding my mistakes over me." I shook my head. We've both made mistakes. The difference now is we're learning from them. She paused, staring out the window. "I've been thinking about Mom a lot lately," she admitted, "about how she handled everything. The land, us, even you. She was patient, but firm. She had a way of letting lessons sink in slowly." "I know," I said softly. "I feel her in the soil every day." We shared a quiet smile. No words were necessary. It was understanding more than conversation, the unspoken acknowledgement that we were finally working together instead of against each other. By midsummer, the community had taken notice. Children from the neighborhood came after school to help with planting or watering. Some elderly neighbors offered gardening tips or tools, and small donations of seeds or seedlings began to arrive unexpectedly. The garden, once a symbol of conflict, had become a shared space, alive and thriving, carrying my mother's legacy forward in ways I had never imagined. Marianne and I began to take turns teaching the young helpers. I showed them how to prepare the soil, check for pests, and space the seedlings. She taught them about watering schedules, composting, and the care that keeps plants healthy over seasons. Watching her with the children, I realized she was finding a new kind of purpose, one that didn't rely on control or ownership, but on guidance and care. One evening, after everyone had left and the sun began to dip behind the horizon, Marianne and I sat quietly in the garden, sipping iced tea. Fireflies danced above the tomato rows, and the air smelled faintly of herbs and summer rain. "You've changed," she said, quietly, almost as if I'd disagree. "And you?" I asked, a smile tugging at my lips. "Maybe," she admitted. "I've learned that letting go of control doesn't mean losing influence. It means trusting someone else to carry the weight with you." We sat together in silence, the garden alive around us. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known since Mom passed. Not the peace of forgetting, but the peace of understanding. Later that night, as I sat in the quiet of the house, I thought about inheritance and what it truly means. It isn't just property or money, it's trust, it's responsibility, it's the choices we make when no one is watching. Marianne and I had both stumbled, misstepped, and hidden parts of ourselves from each other, but through work, honesty, and patience, we had begun to repair what was broken. I finally understood that Mom's true gift wasn't the land itself, it was the lesson she left in how to care, for the soil, for memories, for each other. And it was a lesson I planned to carry, not just for myself, but for the people who would walk through this garden long after we were gone. By late summer, the garden had taken on a rhythm of its own. Mornings began with the soft hum of cicadas and the sun spilling golden light across the rows of plants. I would step onto the back steps, gloves in hand, ready to work the soil, check seedlings, and breathe in the earthy scent of growth. Every leaf, every sprout felt like a message from Mom, a reminder that life, no matter how fragile, continues when cared for. Marianne began arriving more frequently, not daily, but enough that her presence felt familiar and natural rather than tense or forced. She would bring tools, sometimes snacks, often a quiet energy that filled the garden without words. Together, we worked in comfortable silence, pruning, planting, watering, laughing occasionally at the crookedness of a row or the stubbornness of a weed that refused to yield. The rhythm was calming, almost meditative, and I realized that these small acts were repairing more than the land. They were repairing the space between us. One Saturday afternoon, a group of neighbors gathered for a casual garden check-in, curious about our progress. Children ran between the rows, asking questions, helping water, and learning the names of the plants. Elderly neighbors offered advice, shared old seeds, and told stories about the land before Mom owned it. Marianne and I moved among them, instructing, guiding, and occasionally laughing at our missteps. Watching her with the children, I could see a softening in her demeanor, a patience she had never shown when we were younger, and perhaps a humility born from our shared experiences. Later, when the group left, Marianne and I lingered. She picked up a handful of soil, letting it crumble through her fingers. "I never thought I'd feel connected to this place the way you do," she said quietly. "You don't have to. You just have to care when it matters." A long silence followed, filled only by the sound of wind through the trees. For the first time in months, it felt like we were not bound by past mistakes, but by a shared purpose. The real estate issue had faded into the background. Most of the town now saw the garden not as a symbol of conflict, but as a symbol of care, community, and continuity. Even Marianne's professional life didn't prevent her from engaging with the land. She would stop by in the evenings with new seedlings or simply to check that the rows of vegetables and herbs were thriving. Sometimes we argued, gently, over planting schedules or which seedlings should go where, but these disagreements were small, productive, and tempered with humor. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and fireflies began to dance over the tomato plants, Marianne spoke softly. "I think I finally understand why Mom trusted you with this." "And why's that?" I asked, brushing dirt from my gloves. "She saw how seriously you take responsibility, and she knew that I needed to see it too, that stewardship isn't control, it's care." Her words resonated in the quiet garden. I realized she wasn't apologizing in the usual way, but she was acknowledging her growth. That acknowledgement, coupled with my own understanding of her intentions, felt like a subtle healing, one that didn't erase the past but allowed it to coexist with the present. Weeks passed and the garden flourished. Early tomatoes turned red, herbs released fragrant aromas, and flowers bloomed in corners Mom had once tended meticulously. I began documenting planting schedules and soil conditions, passing along notes to Marianne and keeping a journal of seasonal observations, a practice Mom had loved. Some mornings I'd find her kneeling in the rows of basil or checking seedlings with care, and I'd realize that the inheritance she and I shared was no longer land alone. It was a living, breathing testament to patience, effort, and shared understanding. In quiet moments, I reflected on the past year, the secrecy, the betrayal, the anger, and finally the reconciliation. Life had thrown us into conflict, yes, but it had also taught lessons that no amount of money, legal advice, or whispered accusations could impart. We had discovered the depth of trust, the subtle power of patience, and the quiet strength in shared responsibility. One late evening, after the garden was still and the only sound was the wind through the trees, I wrote a small note to Marianne. "Thank you for staying." I left it by the watering can. She would find it tomorrow, and I didn't need a response. It wasn't an apology, not exactly, nor a declaration of forgiveness. It was a simple acknowledgement of growth, presence, and the fact that we were finally walking the same path. The land, once a point of tension, had become our anchor. Each season now brought challenges and joys, and we faced them together, learning slowly that inheritance wasn't always about money or property. It's about trust and responsibility and understanding the true value of what's been left to you. Marianne and I both stumbled along the way, hiding intentions, acting out of fear or pride. But through patience, honesty, and showing up for each other, we began to repair not only the land, but the bond between us. That bond is what my mother wanted preserved, more than any deed, any envelope, or any promise of equal shares. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we hadn't confronted the truth, if resentment had ruled our actions instead of care. Would the garden have become a battleground instead of a sanctuary? Life rarely gives us clear instructions, and family rarely provides a perfect guide, but I've realized the choices we make to forgive, to nurture, to show up for each other define the legacy we leave behind. Mom's real gift wasn't land, it was a lesson in how to carry memory, responsibility, and love forward. And now I leave the question with you, because families, inheritances, and secrets aren't mine alone. If you found a truth hidden from you, something meant to divide but really meant to teach, how would you respond? Would you hold on to anger, or would you choose to understand, to care, and to continue what's been entrusted to you? Sometimes the hardest inheritance isn't what we receive, but what we decide to carry forward. If this story touched you, made you reflect on your family, or inspired you to see value in trust and care, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories about family, betrayal, secrets, and healing, stories that show the messy, beautiful complexity of real life, please subscribe. There are many more lessons waiting in the soil, in the memories, and in the hearts of those who came before us.